Columbus, I would say, is one of the most corrupt cities structurally in the United States.
You're listening to the Gab Street Podcast, Columbus, Ohio's #1 podcast for underground talent. Every week we have new conversations with interesting individuals who contribute to the Columbus economy and its lively culture. You may find just what you're looking for right in your backyard. Let's get right into it. We're back with another Wednesday morning edition of the Gab Street Podcast, episode 41. Zay Crypto, drop
Hello.
that shit for me. You know what I'm asking. I will say that's not what I was expecting, but we'll go with it. We'll go with it for this episode. Perfect. We have two guests with us here today. The co-founders of Matter News. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
We have Jaelynn.
Yep.
And we have Cassie.
Yes.
What's going on? It's great to be here with everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out, making the
Thanks
time.
for having us.
And everybody
Excited.
has very busy schedules this time of the year, so
We can make time.
what with Destination Dystopia and Culture 4 and all kinds of stuff going on.
Great event.
So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on lately. If you haven't heard, we are doing a contest for the Christmas episode because Christmas is on a Wednesday this year. Tag your favorite Columbus personality in the post on our Instagram, and only one entry per person. Remember that. We've had some people tagging people 20 times, and whoever gets the most tags will have that interview. So keep that in mind. Ladies, what is Matter News, and how is it different from other local journalism?
It's a great question. So Matter is a nonprofit news organization. So we primarily publish digitally, but we do pretty much any kind of digital production you can imagine, from videos to podcasts to written articles, you name it, all with a nonprofit model. And we are deep dive focused. So we do investigative journalism. We do really deep dives. We're not going out and chasing police sirens or going out to the scene of a fire. We're not doing that kind of stuff. We're instead going and pursuing stories that are based on the most important issues here in Columbus. So, yeah.
So, we do, like she said, a deep dive into an issue. So, for example, for the last year, we've been publishing content all related to Columbus's growth and development. And that is an issue that we chose, but in the future, our plan is to choose future issues that we dive into with community input, because one of our biggest frustrations with the news is that, and I hear this a lot from people, they don't cover the things that we actually care about and want to know. So I think because of the advertiser model being the traditional model, it wasn't necessarily the end consumer that was driving what kind of content was being made. And so that's why we wanted to go with the nonprofit model, so that we could do things different and actually use community input to be making the decisions about how we cover things and what we cover, and just try to be really grounded in the community, which also manifests in our team and the makeup of our team, and the fact that we're not all just journalists. We come from different sectors of society, and we all kind of bring different things to the table and different perspectives to create what we think is a more meaningful news.
Yeah, I would say that's really how we differentiate ourselves from other outlets in Columbus as well, because we're really, as far as I know, and I've done quite a bit of digging, we're the only investigative nonprofit news outlet here in Columbus.
Really?
There's another nonprofit outlet that is statewide, that they do statewide issues, so not hyper-local like we are. And really, I think the only other thing that would come close is technically the Free Press is operated with a 501c3, but they're not inherently investigative, and they don't publish or do the kind of model that we have. So we really think that this is kind of the way that we can fix issues in the journalism industry, and especially for Columbus, local news has been being depleted and has gotten to the point that it's fairly lacking now, and so we're really trying to fill in the gaps there of things that are missing.
Yeah, a lot of other local news outlets are being bought up by bigger companies. Is that correct? You said one of those was Gatehouse. Is that what we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So actually, even here in Columbus, media consolidation has been a huge issue. So Gatehouse has owned the Dispatch for quite a while, for several years now.
2012.
Yeah, and also a lot of the brands that you think of as being part of the
Or 2015,
media.
sorry.
Yeah.
I think it was basically in Columbus in 2012, sorry, because
No, it's okay, go ahead.
pick back up. But in 2012, I think, is when a bunch of or the Dispatch bought a bunch of local papers. So they bought like a bunch of weekly or suburban
kind of
neighborhood papers. And I think that might have been the same time when like Columbus Alive, Columbus Monthly, all of those came under the Dispatch umbrella. And then in 2015, the Dispatch was bought by Gatehouse Media, which is based out of New York, and I think also
it was. Texas. And now they have a big stronghold in Texas, and they actually like outsource a lot of their content creation to this thing called the Center for News and Design in Texas. And now they just merged with Gannett, which is an even bigger company and actually owns like the Cincinnati Enquirer.
So it's just umbrellas on umbrellas.
Yeah. Well, and now if you think about it, like 3 of the most major papers in Ohio broadly, right? So Columbus Dispatch, the Cincinnati Enquirer, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer, 2 of the 3 of those are owned by the same company, the same media company now, which is Gatehouse Gannett, since they've merged now. And that's, like I said, 2 of the 3 biggest papers in Ohio. And that's not to mention the fact that, like, local smaller papers, like the neighborhood papers that Cassie is talking about, have been completely depleted, like, throughout Ohio. So you're seeing less and less coverage of even, like, the areas that exist where some of these major newspapers are.
One of the stats that I think is pretty striking is that since 2012, this is an Ohio stat, but since 2012, when all of that consolidation was happening heavily in Columbus, Ohio has lost 43% of its newspaper journalists. So that's 43% less people who are, a big reason, and I know we were probably going to get into this at some point, that I started to get into the idea of starting a news outlet is because I currently, in my day job, work for a government agency. I work for Franklin County Child Support Enforcement, and I work in research and innovation, trying to make government programs better. In my government program, the communities, especially that utilize it the most or are forced to utilize it, really know that there's a lot of issues with it, but there isn't necessarily as much pressure, I think, as there should or could be from society for government to do better. And I think a huge reason is because there's a lack of local information, a lack of critical dialogue in communities, and especially in the media, about power, and government is a big thing that we seek to like hold accountable. And we think that the news, the journalism industry is the 4th estate. That's how it's been talked about, that it's the check on all 3 branches of government. And if that is weak, which ours has been extremely weakened, especially in recent decades, we're going to have trouble thriving as a society in all facets.
So how many people does 43% really look like?
Oof. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers would be, but I mean, it is a lot, right? Like that's almost half of newspaper journalists, and I mean, Columbus is definitely suffering, but I think what's suffering even more are like smaller communities outside of Columbus or more rural communities where like people aren't even semi paying attention. You know, at least there's a few publications that are kind of paying attention in Columbus. There's a lot of communities like that, and I think that's probably where most of those newspaper reporters were much smaller
Youngstown,
towns.
for example,
Just
wasn't it Youngstown
paper.
That their community paper, their city paper just closed, and so. That's a city, like, that's a decently major city for Ohio.
I think it was one of the last, like, independently owned newspapers as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
Another thing that's interesting is the Salt Lake Tribune. It's a traditional for-profit paper. You probably recognize the name because it's like pretty widely known in the U.S. I guess it has a decent reputation.
Yeah, for sure.
Just announced that they're changing to a nonprofit from a for-profit.
That's good.
Which is really wild because that's like the first time, at least that I've ever been aware, and maybe one of the first times really that has happened, that a legacy publication that was for profit is becoming nonprofit, because most of the publications, so we are part of a national organization. It's called the Institute for Nonprofit News. It's a bunch of organizations that are similar to us that have the nonprofit funding model, and most of them are investigative. There's about 200 of them nationwide, but most of them have been something similar to us, where it's been kind of a startup where like people from the community have banded together and then created this nonprofit news outlet. I don't think there's really any other ones that have been for profit and then tried to transition into nonprofit. And for us, that was really a big signal of like, this is the way forward. Even for places that have been doing it the old ways, this is the way forward. And for me personally, I actually grew up in Wyoming and Montana, so I grew up like an hour from Salt Lake City. And so seeing them transition, like I know some reporters and stuff there, and I've talked to them about the way that the transition has been. And for me, that's really hopeful, because I know there's not a lot of good reporting for that area. And I think nonprofit is going to be the only way they're going to be able to sustain it. So.
And when we first met, I was, hearing from a lot of my friends that are sort of in the startup community. If you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, don't. And from what I understand, that is a lot more valid from people that understand that industry in like the tech industry. But in a lot of industries, I think it's kind of dangerous if you're hearing that advice the way I did, because I think it was good that we had this dialogue, but you know, she's from the journalism industry, I'm not. And when we first started to get to the details of how we're going to set this up, I was like, you know, should we consider being for profit? And she was really adamant, just because she's been in the industry. She's worked for nonprofit and for-profit outlets, and had really good, compelling reasons why we should be nonprofit. And I think that this is kind of applicable to anyone that might be listening to this podcast, because I think you have a lot of entrepreneurs and young artists and people that are starting things up. Is like, I'm getting other people I know wanting to start things, and they're asking, you know, what should I be nonprofit? Should I be for profit? And I think ours is a really strong example of why there's very specific industries where a nonprofit model may make the most sense. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to be different.
Yeah. I think for that, it's really important to think about the product, right? Because our product is information. And right now, information is something that we have not figured out how to monetize in a way that's effective and equitable, right? Like the way that we have, and I think some of the closest examples is like Patreon. You guys probably are familiar with Patreon and that model. And that's kind of what we do on a much bigger scale, right? Is like, we're not barring access to content for anyone. Like, you can listen to our stuff, you can read our stuff, you can play our video games, you can watch our videos, you can do all of that stuff completely for free. But then there might be some extra content that if you're a donor, you get access to, or things like that, that's kind of extra, not really like the main bread and butter of what we do. And I think that just with where we're at right now, with how information is disseminated, it has become much less valuable than it used to be in the past, right? Like, it used to be that the newspaper was really one of the only sources for you to get information day to day, right? Now people go on Facebook and are in Facebook groups or on Nextdoor and get all the information that they need, and they don't need the day in, day out kind of stuff. So for us, that's been a big part of it, is seeing the industry that we're in and what the product we're creating is, and also figuring out a way that that product is something that somebody would want to invest in, rather than, you know, having to compete with like Facebook or Netflix or any of those things, because it's just there's too much competition now for the old model to still be functioning.
And for us, we ultimately determined that we're not selling a product, we're selling an ideology, and that is like our mission is and vision is to create like a equitable Columbus where people are actively involved in shaping their communities. So we're really at the end of the day trying to sell people on the fact that, you know, information is a public good and that we need this to be a thriving society.
First of all, I'm very glad that it's you two doing this, because you really know your shit.
I hope so.
Very well spoken about these issues. So
thank you.
Keep it up, please. Something we mentioned probably 4 minutes ago about the smaller towns outside of Columbus having this problem as well. Do you have any plans with Matter News to expand to those smaller towns, or are you keeping it in Columbus?
So we've kind of lightly talked about it. So we frame stuff that we do a lot of times as Central Ohio, and we don't want it to get any bigger than that, because we do think that this like hyper focus is incredibly important, right? And we do that not just for area but also topic, right? Like, we only focus on a few issues at a time, and
don't
we
want to
do
spread
that
it too thin.
Right, exactly, because we know that like if the news industry in the way that it is right now, the resources are just too scarce. Like, they're just too scarce. You have to make hard decisions about where you're going to be delegating those resources, and so we think that the more you can focus, the better that you're using those resources.
One of our taglines related to that is that we're for those who get too much information and not enough context, because they say now in the information age that we're like drowning in information and starving for wisdom. So we want to try to do things in a way that's going to like glean some kind of insight to kind of make something click for you, not necessarily to try to inform you of every little thing that's happening.
Yeah.
Sorry to
No, it's okay. I'm glad you're jumping in. But so we've talked about doing Central Ohio, and we'll probably cover some of the smaller towns like in the area, but probably won't do with this specific organization, probably won't go much beyond that, because we don't want to spread too thin. But we have even lately talked about seeing, depending on how well this model gets implemented and how well it does here in Columbus, potentially even taking this model to other areas where there might not be as much disposable income, where there might not be as much growth, where there might not be people that are willing to donate, and seeing if we can make this work in other places as well.
But at the end of the day, we're most interested, I mean, I want to really refine this model and make it so that someone who wants to do what we're doing in Seattle can pick up our playbook and implement it. So like, we don't have ambitions of being some company that's going to be the next huge media company that, you know, populates the whole country.
Yeah, you don't want to become the problem that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. But if we can find a solution that we can then pass off to other people, like I was just saying, the other nonprofit
more
news outlets
inspiration rather than I'm going to tell you exactly how to do this and then manage disadvantage you.
Well,
Yeah,
the big
exactly.
thing is locally owned and operated, and that's
Right.
what, that's a core part of our model. So as we grow, that has to somehow still remain true.
Yeah.
And we believe that if people are going to implement this in their own place, and the people running it, the people, doing every level of it should in some way be there, even if we're maybe more
absolutely.
loosely.
And hopefully,
advising.
ideally, are people that have been there for a lot of their lives, and know that place really well. I think that's part of the reason that we've been as successful as we have is Cassie's lived in Columbus for a lot of her life and knows a lot of people here. A lot of the people that work on our team have been here for most of their life, and even the people that haven't been here in Columbus have been in Ohio for a really long time. And having that grounding in that community, I think, has been invaluable for us to know what is feasible and actually be able to get a pulse for what we should be doing and making sure we're in the right direction in a way that I think if we weren't as well grounded, we wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah, the biggest difference I'm noticing here is that I'm really feeling that mass-produced news kind of thing. It just is super disingenuous with like we were talking about earlier, Gatehouse.
Yeah.
Do you two see a future where all traditional news outlets are being bought up by some umbrella corporation? Do you think we can have a situation some massive underground, unheard of company just owning everything?
I would almost argue we're there. Because there's some exceptions to that. There's a lot of the bigger, more traditional outlets like New York Times is all them. It's all the New York Times company. Washington Post is actually, I think Washington Post is owned by a bigger company now too. So there's a few examples that are different, but for the most part, most newspapers in the country anymore are owned by a bigger media consolidator.
I'll share with you guys this map someone made of the Gannett Gatehouse merger, and it shows what the country looks like, little pins on the map now, and it's literally
That's fucking scary. That's a monopoly on information.
It is. And it's not just newspapers, right? That's true for broadcast too. A lot of, I'm sure I don't know if you guys ever saw the Sinclair example that they had about a year and a half ago.
That was the name I was thinking of earlier.
Yeah, so Sinclair is big in the broadcast industry, and I think they got a bad rap because of that, but there's a bunch of other companies that are like that. I couldn't even name most of them, there's so many, and they change hands so often that it does become these kind of shadowy organizations and corporations that are owning all of this information to where you don't really know where information's coming from.
John Oliver does a really good 17-minute episode on the news industry where he calls out Sinclair, and they kind of cut it together in a good way. We're going to be putting out a lot of stuff to try to educate people on the news industry and what's happened with it and where it's at and stuff like that. So ways that we're doing that, we have an about video that's going to be released any day now, I think. That's going to kind of be a little tongue-in-cheek, and our team kind of going through that. And then we are working on starting up a local news blog where we blog about topics related to local news, and I think our first topic is likely going to be written by our board member Kevin, who wrote a passionate message to NBC4 after this election last Tuesday. We had a city election in which our mayor was up for re-election, as well as 4 city council people. The mayor ran unopposed. City council, in effect, runs unopposed, but in a way. But they didn't cover, local outlets didn't even cover the election. And so granted, it was a bit of we have a bit of fixed election, so there really isn't as much to cover as if it was more legit. But at the same time, the local news needs to cover the elections, and apparently there were really only a couple outlets that wrote a very short article. So we're going to be writing a blog about that. And then we're working on a podcast as well where we talk about these kind of issues and different things. So we've been kind of tracking different interesting topics within this. So we're going to be doing a lot more about that. And then someone else who I would just recommend if you're looking into the industry, even if your politics doesn't totally align with his, is Noam Chomsky. He wrote a book called Manufacturing Consent years back, and it just kind of lays out the way that the industry, it's like the banking industry and a lot of the industries, it's been consolidating since the 80s when a lot of deregulation and globalization started happening, and kind of that trend of having bigger corporations owning all of these outlets regardless of what the product may be, needing to be local.
So what are your 2 individual backgrounds, and how did they lead to meeting each other and creating Matter News?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll start since you got to tell a little bit about it, and then we can just meet up in the middle. So I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for all of my adult life and a little bit before then. So I decided I wanted to be a journalist when I was like 12, I think. I really wanted to write, and I wanted to do something with my writing that was going to help people. So when I was 14, I was going to high school in a town in rural Montana, and I reached out to the local newspaper and was like, I really want to be a reporter. Do you have anything I can do? And I would love to just get on board. Started working with them and have really been working in a variety of newsrooms since then. So I've been working in journalism for a little over 10 years. I went to school at OU, actually, for the Scripps School of Journalism, studied journalism and political science there, and really loved it, and it really like opened up a lot of opportunities for me. So I've really bounced around all over the place, from like a small startup video production company in Manhattan to like an investigative outlet in Hawaii to covering like Congress and the Supreme Court in DC, just like bouncing around to all of these different places and getting a feel for what these different types of newsrooms and environments were. And it was when I was in Hawaii, actually, that the place that I was working for became a nonprofit. Actually, my first day, they switched from a for-profit to a nonprofit, partly because they were running out of money. They had a major like funder before that, who it's actually the guy that founded PayPal, was really into.
Isn't that Elon Musk?
No, there was a couple people. This guy's name is Pierre Omiadar or something like that. I might be butchering it, but it's something like that. He grew up in Hawaii, so he was like, I really want better news and information in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. So he helped to like fund the startup to get started. They started running out of money, and they were like, okay, maybe we should look at this nonprofit. And they were very mission focused anyway, so they were like, this makes sense for us in terms of the kind of organization we are. So I started learning more about what the ins and outs of nonprofit news looked like. And after that, I came to Columbus, and I was here. I was actually like driving Uber and like taking some classes and stuff for a little while, just kind of in between. And I got hired on for a fellowship at probably the biggest nonprofit news outlet in the country. It's Mother Jones Magazine. They're based out of the Bay Area, but they have offices in New York and DC as well. And so I worked in New York there for about 6 months, and in a lot of ways I really loved the work that I was doing, and I loved the people I was working with. I was working with like really incredibly talented people, but I started getting more and more fed up with the role that I was playing in the news industry and with the kind of the rat race of it. Like, I had been told, and I think that a lot of students in a lot of different industries are told this, but especially in journalism, are told that if you want to be successful at all in journalism, you have to go to New York, DC, or San Francisco, for the most part, right? Like, there's a few other ones, but for the most part, that's where you go. And so I was in New York, like, fighting to try to do these, like, tiny little stories that I felt like weren't really that impactful or weren't really that helpful, because there was so much competition there. And I kept thinking about it, and I was like, I want to do more local reporting, which I was in New York but was not reporting on New York issues at all. And I was like, I want to do more local reporting, and I want to be actually going out and talking to people. I get so fed up with people. And I get why journalists do this, and I a lot of times frame it as desktop journalism. It's where journalists really don't get out from behind their computers, and they do phone call interviews or email interviews, and that's the main way they get their information, and they publish stories from that. And I get it, because a lot of the way that the industry has been created and a lot of the models that other organizations use does not allow people to be able to take their time with content or go out and have conversations or even just like take the 15 minutes to drive to a meeting to see somebody in person, right? It just doesn't allow for that. So I understand where they're coming from, but I was becoming that. I was becoming the person that wasn't getting out from behind my computer, that was sitting there all the time. And the people I worked with in a lot of ways were New York elites. And I grew up in rural Wyoming and Montana, and I grew up in like a lower income household, and I was just like felt myself getting like kind of sucked into this bubble, into this coastal elite bubble. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And this was like this was right after the election, right? So I got hired on to Mother Jones literally December of 2016. So like my offer letter was like a call to arms. It was like, the press is under attack. We need you to come and like show up and do this, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm going to show up and do this. And then I got there and I was like, I'm not doing any of the right things right now. I don't think I'm helping at all. So I came back to Columbus because I had some friends here and I really liked Columbus, and started trying to figure out my way around freelancing, and thought that would be kind of the best path forward for me to be able to do local journalism, because there weren't a lot of jobs. Even though I have had quite a bit of experience and have a very like varied skill set, there weren't a lot of jobs or a lot of options for me here. So I tried freelancing, had a little bit of luck with that, and then I met Cassie along the way, and started talking to her about certain stories and stuff that I was working on, and really liked the state of local news here in Columbus. And after we got to talking more and more, she had been working on a project, which I'll let you talk about here in a second, but she had been working on a project for a while, and as we started talking about it, I was like, I think we could really do something cool here. I think we could really build something cool. cool. And Cassie had been already kind of thinking about doing a news outlet and had thought that it would be much further into the future. But I was like, you know what? I'm here. Let's do this. I think we can do this. Let's give it a shot. So yeah, that's kind of what my background has been coming into it. And that's the way that we talk about things a lot, is because I've been from within the industry and seeing the problems from within the industry, and Cassie's kind of been on the outside coming into it.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the election in your background story, and it makes me tell mine a little bit different, because I kind of forget the fact that I first had the idea to start a news outlet around the election. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was a community organizer, working on different issues, not super involved in like partisan politics, but a little bit. And just everything that happened with the 2016 election like made me realize like the role that the media plays in things. Yeah. And at that same time, I actually, during that election, started focusing more locally rather than posting and getting upset about what was happening with the presidential election. I was like, you know what? For the first time in my adult life, I'm gonna like focus way more on like local politics and local stuff than on national. And when I started posting about things in Columbus and the election happening here and different things, people started engaging way more with what I was posting. Before, people always told me they read my political posts and whatever, but now people were messaging me saying, whoa, where can I learn more about this? The fact that city council is so corrupt, like I had no idea. And I didn't have anywhere I could point them to. There aren't good news outlets that cover the structural issues with city council or lay it out for you in any way the way we would with an explainer.
Do you think that the election in 2016 kind of gave municipal governments a chance to be corrupted? Be a little more...
Columbus's is so baked in that it far precedes 2016. Okay. So I can't say that there's no ways that may be true, that it was exacerbated, but generally I think from what I understand, and we've been looking at this as part of our deep dive into Columbus growth and development, the federal government has been cutting a lot of funding that it used to put towards cities. And so cities have become entrepreneurial in and of themselves, where you see these huge bids for the Amazon to come here. Cities all across the state and all across the country are trying to poach businesses from one another because they're all competing to try to, increase their tax base so that they can have enough funding for all of the things that they want to do that the federal government used to cover more of the basic things to keep the lights on in the cities. So Columbus, I would say, is one of in my opinion, which I think is an educated opinion, one of the most corrupt cities structurally in the United States, because there is...
Especially for the size.
Portland is the only city, a large city besides us, that does not have a ward system, so we don't elect people to represent different parts of the city. So in a city of this size, it's very expensive to run a citywide campaign to get enough name recognition.
Like, we have different words, right? Because I have to write that on petitions
and
stuff.
Technically, there are words, but it has nothing to do with our election system or the way that we're represented, essentially. Whereas other cities do have ward systems, and actually what we have is called an at-large system. So you're electing city council to represent the whole city. Those systems were used back in the day to ensure that African Americans and like political minorities could not elect their people to office because winning the whole city over would be really difficult. So that's why ward systems by a lot of people are seen as more equitable, because you have a chance at being able to represent the interests of your part of the city, and that less powerful neighborhoods and types of people won't get left behind by a system where you're just representing everybody.
Which they clearly have here.
Yes, I think so. And so there's that. So us in Portland, the only ones that are large cities of our size that don't have a representation. And then Indianapolis, from what I know, is the only other city of our size that does not have campaign spending limits. We just enacted them. The city said there was a big effort by some people in Columbus, Everyday People for Positive Change, to reform city council so that there was a ward system and to curb campaign spending limits. city council, the city attorney rejected their most recent effort, saying that it was 2 issues in one and that they would need to file like totally separate issues. And then at the next city council meeting, without actually putting it on the agenda, which is required, city council put up and voted to pass their own amendment that reformed, quote unquote, reformed by instituting campaign limits, but they're the highest in the country out of any cities that have campaign limits of our size. They're higher than like a lot of states' campaign spending limits. And they also put in an award system, but the whole city elects people to represent certain wards. So like someone in Bexley is voting on the person that's going to represent Linden.
It's fucked up.
So they basically didn't change the route or like the part that would actually change anything about the fact that the Democratic Party in Columbus has 100% monopoly on city government power. We have Republicans, we have independents in the city, but we don't have any on city council.
And probably the biggest reason nobody knows about this is because nobody's talking about it. None of the news outlets. So
well, and I haven't even talked about the worst part about city council infrastructure, which is that we don't elect them. So none of this really even matters that I'm talking about with because we don't even elect them. They appoint 35 out of the last 39 city council people were originally appointed, not elected. So what happens is, for example, one of the city council people gets elected to city attorney. It's a higher office. After that election, city council appoints someone to go in that vacancy instead of the person who got the next most votes in the election, like going in there.
So they're appointing their new members, but how do they pick them? Just like friends? Just friends?
Those campaign donations, I think there's all types of favors, different things, political.
So if I was like,
just appoint you,
dude, if I was like a millionaire, I could be like, hey.
Well, and it's gonna be someone the Democratic Party is sure they can keep in line with what they want to see. So they're not gonna choose. There's been for a while now a challenge within the Democratic Party locally called Yes We Can. And they're the Working Families Party is what they call themselves. And they've been trying to kind of challenge, they've been really one of the people really elevating these issues within the Democratic Party and within just like the city generally being controlled by the Democratic Party.
Democracy is dead. Get your pitchforks, people.
Yes. But that's really the thing is like at the end of the day, I have a hard time seeing us really making big improvements on any issue matter could be looking into if we don't fix just the fact that the people who are representing us aren't actually elected by us or chosen by us or aren't structurally put in place to represent us. And I think there's this map of Columbus, and I can find the article where it shows where the city council people live in Columbus, and it's literally an L on the map, like the northwest.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna learn more about this after the break. This is fucking crazy. This is so much stuff.
I got like off my origin story, but
No,
I try to tout this issue whenever I can.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll keep the ball rolling. We're gonna hear a message from our very own Zay Crypto.
Yes,
for
sir.
About a minute and a half or something like that.
Lift off.
Coming soon.
December 1st.
Yes. We will be right back.
Hey guys, this is Zay Crypto, here to tell you about my debut project Liftoff, dropping December 1st. This is the culmination of the past 3 years of my life put into music. It's a short EP, but it's my first time writing to my own instrumentals. My production skills have improved immensely this year, and this is just a taste of what's to come. In this project, I tried to display my versatility and express my innermost thoughts and feelings. I also want you to get a better sense of who I am as a person. Music has been such a huge influence in my life and has given me purpose when I had none. I want to create music that gives people strength, and I'm hoping that you'll find something in my music that makes you feel less alone. I have a very eclectic taste in my music, so it's hard for me to pin down what my style is. However, if you like hip-hop, rock, or experimental music, then this EP is for you. Look for Liftoff on Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, and all other major streaming platforms on December 1st. Thank you for your time. Now back to the show.
Like I was on Instagram like back in June or March or something, and I found you guys, and I was just like going through.
You found us right when we
Yeah, and I was like telling everyone, I'm so hyped, and then the day comes and my work's like, nah, you can't get that day.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, I'll be there next time though for sure.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna quit my
You'll
job.
tell your job like, no, sorry, Cloud City's happening.
Yeah.
Bye.
We're back in the place to be. We're talking about Cloud City.
Yeah.
I was able to go for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry I cut you off. Just.
No, it's okay. It's totally fine. It was on topic, so
yes.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was only able to be there for like the first 3 hours of it, because usually when I go to a festival, like I volunteered at 2x2 Hip Hop Festival for like 4 years in a row, and when I do that, I go from beginning to end of the entire festival. And I anticipated having more energy, and I burnt out really fast at Cloud City, and I left at like 6:30.
There was just so much dopeness that it burnt you out.
Yeah, I was like, I'm taking in so many cool things, I can't handle it.
That's how I felt the entire night.
Yeah. Well, also one of the best networking things ever. Like that was fantastic.
That's what it was intended to be. Yeah.
Okay, good, because it worked. Because I met a bunch of clothing brands. I met the people that we did the episode with last week, Amy Wisman and Kamisha Thomas.
Yeah.
I met them through the Cloud City jail.
Hell yeah.
Which was such a cool setup. They did such an amazing job with it. It was
honestly,
so cool.
one of my favorite parts of the whole thing.
For sure.
Yeah, same.
Very well done.
We wanted to take the theme super far, and like it was amazing how many people came together to like really carry out the vision, and Amy and Kamisha were one of them. Like creating a Cloud City jail was just like brilliant and on brand and on vision, but they also like what we want to do with Cloud City is to make space for the dopest in the city to come in and do their thing in their multimedia realm. And so that really manifested with Bobby Couch, who came in like 2 months before the festival and pulled off an entire fashion production complete with 6 local designers, 28 models.
I've been hearing his name a lot more lately.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
he is incredible. And
come on the show.
yes, you should have him on the show.
up.
He has his own podcast called On the Couch with Bobby Couch, and he's a dope personality. You'd have a lot of fun talking to him. But he did exactly what we intended. Same with Kamisha and Amy, which is, we just made space. We were having the festival. We were doing all the promotion. So you didn't have to worry as much about all that stuff as when you're doing your own event, because these are all people that do their own events too. And so we're kind of giving you this space to come in within this kind of environment and put your best foot forward and kind of like create your own part of the city. And so they really did that and brought it to life. And Matter News was like the news outlet. So we really wanted to make space for people to kind of discover the most kind of dope underground things that are, going to be not so underground, I think, in the coming years, but that we really wanted to use the networking at Cloud City. That was one of the biggest things that we intended with the event. We marketed it to the general public, but we really marketed most heavily to creatives. And we said that this is really a space by and for creatives and for people who should be working together, that should be connected in terms of the visions and projects they have going on, to meet each other, to be exposed to each other's art forms and kind of, products and different things.
And one thing I want to plug that ended up branching off from Cloud City afterward was Visioneers Showcase.
Yes.
That's going on every first Tuesday of each month. I'm pretty sure that's when it is. I said it wrong 2 episodes ago.
At Wild Goose Creative.
Yeah, Wild Goose Creative, every single first Tuesday, they have, they're always looking for new film directors, music video directors. If you create something visual, hit up Sam Rothstein or me. I can get you in contact with him as well.
Creative even.
Yeah, and I've been to both of the ones that have happened so far, and it is like nothing else, because it is a gathering of some of the most talented people in the city and some of the most hardworking people. And music videos bring everyone together too in a crazy way, because you're doing a video for an artist. The videographer is involved. Everyone watches music videos pretty much. It's something that a lot of people know about, but not a ton of people are actually involved. And not a lot of people know about these kinds of things going on, and that there are actually people behind these videos that are literally putting weeks and weeks of work into it. So shout out everybody that comes to that, and I will be there literally every time, so if you want to come say hi, please do.
And a lot of it is like community and discussion focused, so it's not just a showcase of here, look at some of the work, but
I did.
But the people are talking about it, but it's also a podcast combined with it. So what I love that Sam does with a lot of his events is he combines it with a podcast, so that there's like inherently this entire part of it where they're just discussing kind of the industry and the things that they're seeing, and he's doing that with a new comedy series that kind of is somewhat born out of Cloud City-ish, or is also associated with our brand, and it's the same thing where they're doing a podcast on stage, and then they have comedians doing stand-up throughout it, and it's really kind of creative in making space for not only displaying the art, but also creating a bit of community and things, because a lot of our creative scenes, even into the news, are so fractured and so honestly like not in good shape in a lot of ways, and there isn't enough kind of infrastructure being built or spaces being built where people can really talk about these issues and kind of come together and form solutions.
One thing that, I don't know if this is 100% related to what you're saying, but one thing that needs to have a little bit more infrastructure behind it in this city is the comedy scene.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I was starting to go there, the comedy scene. Atrociously awful. I feel terrible for the people most invested in that scene.
I'm looking to get way more involved with that, so if you want to work with me in any way, I want to throw comedy shows and stuff like that. I really believe in being funny. I don't know, I'm super passionate about the theory of stand-up comedy. Yes. I love hearing people talk about it. I love meeting and talking to comedians. Like Cecil Heyman is one guy.
He's the guy that does the show with Sam.
Yeah. And great talker. Sam is also a great talker.
I literally tell him,
he's so funny.
He needs to find a job that that pays him for his gift of gab, because literally he needs to be like a radio show. Gab Street. He is, and that was one of the things that was great about building Cloud City with him, is like he can just like articulate a vision for something and like pull all of these obscure references to movies and like talking about Blade Runner nonstop and like all this stuff, because he just has all of these little like things that are swirling in his head about how to make like events and experiences optimal. Also
shout out Danny, Ace on Intrigue.
Yes.
He does the film podcast with Sam right before the showcase at Visioneers.
And another thing that came out of Cloud City just happened last night, where Danny and Fee and some people that worked on Cloud City that didn't know each other before just through a house party last night, where we had some of the multimedia elements. We had the Cloud City skate ramp there.
Culture with a Q.
Yeah, Culture with a Q. Performances. We had the Zen Den. We had like 20 people at one point meditating in the attic of a house party. So a lot of revolutionary stuff happening.
Which you normally don't associate with a party.
No.
Meditation, but it's also hella fucking cool.
So we actually are really trying to make mindfulness go more mainstream, even if we have to drag all of the inventory for our Zen Den everywhere we go and make places super vibey and, light sage and do energy cleansing and play binaural beats and teach people a bit about guided meditation. And we've brought it to not only house parties, but Bobby Couch had us to the Black Fashion Expo. So it was like an expo for Black fashion, but he had us do a Zen Den and bring virtual reality there. So we're really have a lot of people really interested in incorporating these multimedia elements at their events to exposing their audiences to mindfulness in a way that they might not. And I know that Isaiah, who's one of our co-founders of Cloud City and my partner, is the person who's kind of brought a lot of this mindfulness to everything we're doing with the Phantom Reality, which is his company. And, he's really passionate about bringing it to especially Black communities that haven't been as exposed to some of these ideas as more privileged and wider communities. And so to have that at the Black Fashion Expo, to have it at a house party where people may not be as familiar with mindfulness or be interested but not really have a community around that is what we're really trying to do.
It's important to get lit, but calm the fuck down, basically.
Well, and have safe spaces for people to like chill at things like that.
Do you practice meditating like on a daily basis?
So This week, yes.
It's good week.
Not consistent all the time, but Deepak Chopra has a free 21-day meditation going on right now, and I love his meditations. They're like transcendental, and he gives you just a theme every day that kind of builds to kind of meditate on. But I really like guided meditations. I'm not always consistent with it.
I've been trying to meditate consistently this entire year, and I'm so bad at it.
It's okay.
I got the Headspace app. Have you ever heard of Headspace?
Yes.
Yeah,
I have that
Headspace is
too.
great.
It helps a lot to have like an app to kind of But you don't have to be like great at meditation. Regardless, like you're giving your mind a rest. Yeah. You're processing some things, even if your mind's wandering. You're not great at holding the attention.
My biggest problem is finding time to do it, and when I do end up doing it, it's usually in the morning or at night, and I sometimes
fall asleep. That happens to me too. Too. So it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it also is not for everyone all the time, though, because I know if I were to do it, I feel like I'd go a little crazy, because I process everything through talking. I do a podcast. But, you know, if I'm having some kind of issue in my life, if I talk about it, that is pretty much or write it down somehow. Sitting there with just my thoughts hasn't really worked in the past.
I don't know, mate. I think meditation would help anyone, because it's not so much about it's more detaching from your thoughts. It's more like seeing that you aren't your thoughts. Like, I'm not even that good at meditation, but I guess I understand the basics.
Yeah.
I haven't had any experiences where I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. It's mostly just I'm bored for 10 minutes. But
Yeah.
I think way too much.
Yeah.
I need to focus on that.
Well, and I'm such a talker too, and I love talking through issues too, but meditation's helped me a lot in finding focus for those conversations, because I have so much noise going on in my head so often that picking apart the things that I need to focus on, or that figuring out what is even bothering me in certain moments or not bothering me, is so hard. And I think meditation is so great at giving you that clarity, and I almost never stop my thoughts. People always talk about just stop thinking during meditating. That almost never happens to me, but I am able to remove myself from my thoughts more, and I feel that helps me in other conversations and stuff I have, just to be more focused.
I just found out recently there's 20 different types of meditation. It's not all the same thing.
Probably even way more than that,
Yeah.
depending on if you're talking about
doing
I
a
think there's a bunch
handstand,
of-
what's going on here?
Probably could if you were strong enough.
Yeah, Isaiah does
He
headstand.
does-
He does it on this.
He does
last
it
performance
everywhere.
he
It's
did.
amazing.
He started in a headstand and started rapping in a headstand.
That's
and
awesome.
He
I
does
love
it.
that.
He did it last night at the party in the Zendan, and he believes that headstand's a huge thing because of the way it has blood flow going to your head, and he believes that it's a really powerful form of meditation. I personally am not currently strong enough to get and remain in a headstand, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a good thing to strive for.
Shout out Isaiah for helping us carry the ramp
Yes.
in for culture.
The Cloud City skate ramp.
Oh my god, that was so heavy.
It was heavy. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I might just want to circle back on, and I never bring things back, so I'm really proud of myself right now, but you had asked about my origin story later, and kind of Matter's origin story, and we kind of got off track talking about a lot of different things.
That's okay.
But,
that's what we do here.
But yeah, it was around the election, and I started talking about kind of how I was posting more about local, and I was getting people hitting me up, and people were telling me they learned more from my Instagram than from the local news. So I was like, oh, wow, I got into my dream position in government. I'm doing research and innovative stuff in government, and this was supposed to make me feel like I'd have the power to really change things. And now I'm realizing we have a fundamental issue, which is that people are telling me they don't have good sources of local news. And if I think about how my theory of change works in terms of how we can get the government to improve and things like that, I don't see how it can happen if that is a huge market gap that's happening with the local news. So I had no idea how I'd do it. And after the election, it was just confusing what to do with things. So I for a year kind of had the idea to start a news outlet, but didn't really make moves toward it. And then I was you know what? In early 2018, I was I have no idea how I'm going to do this. I have no journalism background, but I'm just going to go out there, start making a mini documentary series about the development of Columbus, because I think when we were talking earlier, you said something about like what's an issue in Columbus that's like might be surprising, or I don't know, something about Columbus
Many
that's
people
surprising.
that live here don't really know about it.
And or maybe it was a different question you asked related to like kind of trends here, but I started seeing that basically to me one of the biggest things in the news that gets a lot of play but not a lot of context is development of the city. And we're at this critical growth point where we're about to explode. We're already starting to explode. And if there isn't critical discussion around city development and the way that we want to see this city grow and develop, I think that's going to be a big issue. So 2 months into making this documentary, you know, I have no skills. I'm just kind of trying to figure this out. I have a few friends, including Kevin, who's on our board now, that was trying to help me figure it out, but they were not journalists. So 2 months in, my friend Alexia, who runs Humans of Columbus, if you're familiar with them, and the Columbus Book Project, introduced me to some filmmakers, Loose Films, and they had me on a documentary style shoot that they were hired for. And Jaelynn was the journalist, and I was just kind of telling her about my ideas. We met up, and you know, she was like, well, I was just thinking about leaving Columbus because of what she was saying about there not really being good journalism jobs here. And she was like, well, would I be coming into your thing since this, like, you had an idea already to do this news outlet, or like, would it be like 50-50? And I'm like, 50-50, like, you know what you're doing, like. And so we make a really good partnership because, you know, she is the industry expert and I play the agitator, and that's kind of the role I play with Cloud City too, is that Sam and Isaiah are the experts in events. They've been doing events. They're even bigger, like they've been artists for longer than I have. And I'm kind of the outsider. I'm a project manager. Is one of the major things I do in my government role, is just managing projects and complex kind of change and building kind of infrastructure. So I'm able to kind of like ask the questions about like, okay, Jay, like when we're deciding how we're going to do this news outlet or this editing structure, like, is this the way things really need to go down, or is this standard that we have for our brand like something that's like kind of carried over from the old way of doing journalism, and that's what you were taught in journalism school? Or do you think there's really good reason that we should be doing things this way? And how do we kind of create a legitimate brand, because we are a startup, so we have to, you know, news especially, it's a serious thing that we're doing investigations, we're purporting to give people education on community issues, so we have to have like high standards, but we also want to be relatable and, like we said, community driven and like accessible. So when we say that we're accessible, it's not only because our content's free, but we also want the way that we talk in our pieces to be an accessible grade reading level, you know, all that stuff, so that we're even thinking about, you know, most of all of our videos, we pretty much put closed captions on, and you know, even though that takes extra time to transcribe all of those, it's really important to us that we're not just making information for the privileged, but empowering people to be more informed community members across the board.
Hell yeah, that's awesome. So we've covered locally owned and accessible, which are two of the three aspects. We kind of just roamed around them a bit.
Yeah.
But so on your website, it does say that the three attributes that you focus on the most, is that what you would say about those? Locally owned, accessible, and the third one is entertaining.
Yes.
So let's go into that, because you mentioned video games earlier and stuff like that. And you know, even in my family, we've been passionate about like the gamification of knowledge and things like that. And seeing that manifest in real life is a big, makes me giddy. I like that.
Yeah.
So let's go into that a little bit.
And it's the best way for people to understand things, really. I mean, a big part of our philosophy overall is that we want to meet people where they're at, and we want to come to them and not make them come to us. And that gets carried over in a variety of ways, right? Like physically, we go to specific places to talk to people that might not be engaging with us otherwise. We publish on all sorts of different platforms and don't necessarily ask for people to come back to our website because we know that's not necessarily the type of content they want. And we do really want to make sure that our stuff is entertaining. So the way that I like to talk about the news a lot of times is like the news, and your news consumption has to be a fairly well-balanced diet, right? Like you should have like the hearty vegetables and the things that are good for you, but then you can also have the fluff stuff, right? And I think the fluff stuff is things much more like BuzzFeed and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Like the feel good stuff. And like I read tons of that, you know, like I am a sucker for listicles, like not gonna act like I'm not. But that's kind of the like snacks and dessert and things like that around it, right? You need to have the vegetables, but we also want to make sure the vegetables are something people actually want to eat, you know? Like otherwise nobody's going to, because nobody has to anymore. It's not a newspaper where we have complete monopoly over the community and the information that's getting spread there. Instead, we have to compete. And I think that what a lot of people forget is that we're not just competing with like the Dispatch, right? Like I saw a tweet from somebody who works for the Dispatch. I don't remember who it was at this point, but was something along the lines of like, if you would pay whatever it is, $6 a month for Netflix, why wouldn't you pay the $5.99 for the Dispatch subscription? And I was like, that's so absurd to act like you are on the same level as Netflix, because people can watch amazing documentaries and get amazing information that they actually want to consume on Netflix compared to what the Dispatch is doing, you know? Like, the Dispatch is just the vegetables. There's no extra good sauce or anything else on top of it.
And they're owned by a bigger company.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. Yeah.
Appreciate it. But yeah, so we really think that it's really important that, like, people get the kind of stories that they want to hear. Like, I get so annoyed, and actually in our About video, we have this really cute moment where I'm, like, ranting and raving about this, because I do rant and rave about it a lot. But I get so sick of people saying that, like, especially younger folks don't care about important issues. It's just not true. It's just not true. When you look at the things that people are consuming, it's not that they don't care about important issues. They just don't want to read a boring-ass news article. You know? They just don't.
Yeah.
Instead, they want things that are actually going to be entertaining and that are going to be thought-provoking and that are going to be, like, engaging in some way. So we really try to make sure that we're driven story first, and that story dictates the format that it's going to be told in, and that we really try to push the boundaries and be as innovative as we can in terms of what different ways of storytelling looks like, whether that is just a traditional article or a podcast series or a video game or an explainer series or even like live performances and stuff. We've talked about all sorts of things around that because storytelling is much broader than the news has traditionally thought about it.
Awesome.
So we have right now on our website mostly articles, explainers. We do have an economic segregation map where you can go in and you can kind of zoom in on different parts of Columbus and see how like economically segregated your part of Columbus versus Columbus overall is, because in 2012 there was a University of Toronto study that said Columbus was the second most economically segregated city in the United States. And that, I think, lends itself to racial segregation. We know that there's a heavy effect of redlining and things that we've looked at with development, and we'll be doing some more content on redlining for people that might not be familiar with what it is. But where was I going with that?
The economic segregation map.
Yeah, the economic segregation map is one where we're kind of trying to create data visualizations that are interactive, that are kind of like helping you see issues.
I personally love those.
Yeah.
That's something I will engage with.
For sure.
Personally.
And that's gotten one of the biggest tractions for us. It's also a visual thing, so when we're sharing that on social media, it's like, more striking. But we do have like this idea for a video game. We have not broke ground on this project yet, so don't expect it anytime soon. Well, actually, we did start.
We started it, but
we don't have anyone to carry it out right now. So it might be ways down the road, but it shows how we want to go beyond also. So we have mini documentaries that are coming out soon. We have an investigative podcast series that we're working on, and that WCBE is another partner on. But one of the things, for example, we wanted to do is in terms of growth and development, there's a lot happening with like zoning and people wanting to make changes to their homes, or developers asking for variances.
And it's confusing.
Different things. It's so confusing. And so we were going to do this like first player video game, like a lo-fi video game where you choose one of 3 paths, and then like it'll be you're a homeowner trying to make a modification to your house, or you're a developer trying to put in a commercial zone thing in a residential neighborhood or whatever, and it kind of like walk you through the steps of what you would have to do if you were going through that thing. So trying to come up with innovative ways of immersing people in the stories and being a little bit creative in how, and especially if it's a little bit more boring, like what are the processes by which you need to do this in the city, like making it a little spicier. A documentary, probably not going to be very interesting on that topic, but like a first player person video game, we think, it's story first.
When you talk about that, the first thing I think of is a flowchart.
Yep.
So I would read all the way through that personally, if you had like the 3 paths. And
for sure.
So.
Which is basically what it is, but instead of getting the full chart from the get-go, you like walk
play
through
the
and have to
game.
play through it. Yeah. Okay. And so I think that and we create different types of content for different types of people, right? So like the video game that we're talking about is for people who might not care a ton about development, but are kind of lightly interested and would want something to engage with more, that would hold their attention more, right? Because they might not have like as much initial buy-in. But like the economic segregation map that Cassie was talking about, those kinds of projects I absolutely love, because I think they fit whether you just want to skim it or you want to dive deep. And I feel like you're kind of a dive deep person, and that's what I love about those, is like you could look at that map and get a good good story of what's going on in Columbus. Like, you can see how economically segregated Columbus is, and also like what the saturation of those different like income levels and things like that are in Columbus. But you can also go further, and you can start diving into specific areas and looking at some of the stats that we have within that, and really dive in, and in that way almost become your own reporter and like digging into the data that we're presenting. So I think we really try to do a lot of variety of different things so that we are meeting people, like I said, where they are, depending on how much they really care about this or are going to want to dive into it.
And there really isn't anybody else doing it like your organization is, right? Or
definitely not here.
Yeah.
Nationally, there's probably some people that we pull from. Like, I am such a sucker for Vox. I absolutely love Vox, and we definitely draw like a good amount of inspiration from them, especially in terms of like the explainers and context around the news. But they're not even as hard hitting as we are in some ways. Like, we're definitely like pulling from a lot of inspirations, but I have not seen anything that's like what we're doing exactly.
I don't know that anyone has quite our model with the various components, and so we want to do a lot of education about that model, and also pitch it to some of the larger funders. It may take us a little bit to build up our reputation, but I think we have a really good chance at convincing some major, whether it is foundations or just like donors that want to see a true evolution of the news industry. I think that we have a lot of things kind of coming together for us, and one thing we haven't talked about yet, but like we said, we want to make sure we're community informed. A lot of newsrooms can say we have this tip line, and we take those into account when we're like doing our coverage. For us, we want to go beyond that, and so one thing that Jaelynn worked for that civil beat in Honolulu, they created a van that they took out.
And there's a few other places that have this. Like, NPR has StoryCorps, and it's kind of that philosophy too, and it's like basically like a recording studio in a van, or in like some kind of vehicle that they drive to different places and try to like reach out to different parts of the community. We were not going to be able to get a van, so so we actually got some funding from a local organization, Confest. They give out grants for different things, and actually gave us a grant to build a portable pop-up audiovisual studio.
Nice.
And so we were not going to be able to get a van, and we were not going to be able to trick out a van, but instead we came up with a plan that was going to be low cost and incredibly portable. So now we've got it all built, and we take it out and premiere it every once in a while, and we'll start at the beginning of this next year, we'll start taking it out into different communities and basically doing like man on the street type interviews, but it'll be in a studio, so people have more privacy, and we'll also get better quality content as well. And I think that's been one of the coolest things that we've gotten validated, is like clearly there are people even locally that really care about what we're doing and want to see this kind of next evolution.
And the idea is to take eventually, once we have like a paid staff that could do this, especially taking the studio out into communities and saying, we're going to be posted up in this community on this day, and like really advertise it and say, we want you to come out and tell us what you're seeing in your neighborhood, so that we can just have our ears to the ground about what's going on, like what is most impacting people in different parts of the city, or even say, we have a story on your neighborhood, and rather than just relying on the connections of the people in our news organization, we need to get outside of our bubbles and be telling stories and hearing voices that are outside of our natural networks.
That's dope.
Who is on your team?
Ooh. So
It's
our
a fairly big
website sort of will tell you, but we need to update it because things do shift, because we're an all volunteer team.
So starting kind of from the people that are the most involved. So Cassie and I are co-founders, and probably the most the other person who's been the most involved is Riss Twig. She's an OSU graduate, studied energy and sustainability as well as journalism, and has been with us like really since the beginning. Like very shortly after Cassie and I came together, Cassie scoped out an article that she had done for the Lantern that was about class
poverty in 5 Columbus neighborhoods.
And it was a really great like photo. It was kind of a photo essay meets a data visualization, so it was really visual and really cool. So we brought her on, and she's been an invaluable help and does like a lot of our stuff. She actually produces the monthly newsletter that we have. So we have like a kind of a newsletter digest of development issues. She sends out once a month. So she's been really involved. We have a few other reporters that have been really involved. Isaiah does music for us. Max Rolstad has been a big reporter on a lot of the stuff we've done. Khalil Newton does a lot of like video production and stuff for us. And then we have a board of about 5 people, right? Is it 5 people now? And probably another like 6 to 7 people that are floaters and do various things for us, whether it's like engagement for events, or they work on specific pieces, or they work on specific projects. Like we have 2 other reporters on staff who I absolutely adore. One of them I worked with in college. Her name's Olivia Miltner. She's been been a freelance journalist for a long time and has worked at WSU and a bunch of other places. And then the other one is Tajan Mormon. She actually works for Columbus Underground now, and both of those guys work on an investigative podcast that Cassie kind of alluded to earlier that we're working on right now. So we have a pretty big team. We have quite a few people that are really like helping out in various capacities, which is amazing because we're all volunteer too. So.
I like to point out, because we're doing a big fundraising campaign right now, and it's the first time in the year we've been, in existence.
Plug.
Yes.
Do it.
That we've actually really done fundraising. Like you've been able to donate it to us this whole time, but we haven't really made asks of people to do that until we're a year in. And the reason is because we feel like we sort of had to build our product. If you're looking at it as a startup, and that was us putting this model into place and starting to create content and all that good stuff and refine our brand and put that out there. And in a year with an all volunteer, next to no funding other than that bit of funding from Comfest and Jaelynn
which
and I
also
savings
doesn't
accounts.
Pay for anybody.
Yes.
Like they only pay for the cost of materials. Like they specifically have policies that they will not pay for staff.
And none of us are carpenters, and we built built an audiovisual studio. We published 10 pieces. We published a ton of social media content. We started on 3 documentaries, an investigative podcast series, and a blog and a podcast of our own. So we've done a lot. We're ambitious. We've been to community events. So we've
been to a lot of community events too.
If we can do all that with no funding, imagine with this fundraising campaign we have, which goes through the end of December. Any donation made to us will be doubled by this organization called Newsmatch. So every donation up to $1,000 per donor will be matched and doubled. So we're hoping that we can, already we've secured a good little chunk of change to be able to start paying for important things like insurance and, getting to the point, starting to get closer to the point where we can pay people to help us create content so that we're not burning ourselves out, spreading ourselves too thin. So we have to become a full-on nonprofit. So we're building a nonprofit and a news outlet at the same time,
and also a startup. We're in a lot of intersecting circles of difficult things, but we're maneuvering it and we're figuring it out.
That's great. I had a question for you. Do you think blockchain technology is going to play a role in the future when it comes to the news and the media?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think it already has. So originally, way early on with Matter, I was looking at different content management systems that we could use for our website, and also just to plug in all of the content that we're producing, right? Because the CMS that you use for a news organization that's digital is really can make or break everything.
Yeah.
We ended up going with WordPress because there was the most pre-built for that. And I don't know if we're going to stay with that forever. But there was actually another platform, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but I think it might have even been called Civil or something like that. But it was a CMS that was specifically built and geared for news organizations that was all funded and operated with blockchain technology.
That's awesome.
And the payments for it were all in cryptocurrency.
Hell yeah.
So, and they've been building out for a while. I got on the list way early on for that, and I've been getting some updates for it, and it's something that I kind of keep in the back of my mind for potentially in the future we might want to transition to it once we have a bit more of our structure built. But there's definitely room for that, and especially because journalism and technology are at such a high intersection right now that there are a lot of journalists that are really interested in it. I will be interested to see how widespread the usage of it gets, to see whether or not it would be sustainable.
There's so many cool ideas that just haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how blockchain affects the next 10 years. There's this one startup called Poet, which is purely for artists to publish their work and maintain ownership, but get all their revenue that they deserve.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So you can stream it on their service, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but it's just set up where anyone can use your music, but you get all the revenue straight to you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool, yeah. And I've seen more and more platforms like that, but so I'm always iffy about them because I'm always iffy about what the returns are actually going to be.
I mean, you never know. It's really, really, truly the Wild West for cryptocurrency. Did you hear about?
Absolutely.
Did you hear about BitConnect? Oh, it was the craziest pyramid scheme. So many people lost money.
Really? Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Was that a type of cryptocurrency?
It was. Their whole thing was we got this revolutionary AI technology which trades your Bitcoin on the markets, and the AI can just predict when to sell and when to buy. So give us your Bitcoins, we'll make you money. And people were making money, but they were just making money from other people's Bitcoins. So it was it all trickled.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was, a lot of people predicted it was a scam, but it's just like free money, so people bought in. People
Damn.
were making money, but at the end, lots of people lost a lot of money.
Shit.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right in saying that it is like the Wild West. And I think that one, I think that like blockchain technology is specifically is Wild West, because I feel like that about tech kind of in general right now. And I think we're starting to kind of see that come to a head with things like Facebook and Twitter and like the rules in the election and things like that, and seeing that like having these like big forces be completely unchecked can be problematic, and we should look at it more. But it'll be interesting to see how it kind of continues to grow.
Yeah.
Apparently, I need a crash course from you because
I have, dude.
Same.
I didn't understand a single fucking word.
Like 2 years ago, me and my friends made like a 20-page PowerPoint presentation. I can actually show you. It's all about.
I am interested.
Wow, you're on this.
I was like, I thought I was gonna be a millionaire 2 years ago. I thought I was like a genius. You know, one of those Bitcoin
awesome.
miners, like the machines that I bought one of those.
Yeah.
Right before the Bitcoin price collapsed.
Oh no.
So like, I managed to sell it to someone.
Yeah.
I made my money back, but
Well, that's
I
good.
bought my Bitcoin and stuff right before it collapsed. No,
Yeah.
I haven't messed with it at all.
I didn't buy
I
much.
thought about it, but I was so iffy because it's so new that I just didn't know.
yeah, but I thought it was just gonna keep going up. I was like,
Shit.
this will make me money if I just plug it into the wall. And I'm gonna buy another one, and I'll be making double money.
Oh my god.
And then I was just envisioning like buying a house with like 100 miners plugged in the
Damn.
basement, just printing money for me. And then the price collapsed.
Oh no.
Yeah,
It'll
That's
bounce back
hilarious.
eventually.
Zay Crypto,
Yeah, sure.
everybody.
yeah.
That's
Zay
why his artist last name is Crypto.
One of the reasons.
Yeah. Many reasons why.
Many reasons.
A man of many hats.
Yes.
It is true.
Dude, yeah.
So how can people get involved with Matter News? What's the best way? Volunteer, donation?
I would say probably the best way, the thing that would help us the most is to become a sustaining member.
Okay.
And actually for this month and next month, it's way more than double matching. So specifically for sustaining members, they actually match the full year's value. So like if somebody became a sustaining member for $10 a month, instead of us just getting another $10 and getting 20 total, Newsmatch will give us $120 for that one person's $10.
Not bad.
So it like really, really like increases the amount of money that we'll get, and sustaining members help us have the most sustainable revenue going forward.
And
it's
sustaining member just means recurring monthly donor.
yeah,
You know,
it just means you give a little bit every month, and you could give as low as $1 to us every month and get certain benefits, and we have those all listed out on our website as well. And I think it's honestly like a better path for people who might not have a ton of disposable income but really do want to invest in local news and want to contribute, because you can give a little bit over a larger period of time, and that's better for us, and I think it's better for other people's wallets too.
Cool.
I would probably say that. Also volunteering though.
Yeah, volunteering, we have events and different things, but the biggest thing besides like, you know, say you don't necessarily want to lift too much of a finger or really can't afford to donate is just tuning in. So check out our
Sharing your
website,
stuff.
even if you're not into reading, you know, boring articles, and you know, none of our articles are real boring, but we have like, you know,
You can get in the weeds a little bit.
we have a gentrification explainer on there that talks about the different stages of gentrification and how some of that's played out in Columbus. I think that's really interesting, especially if you're in Columbus. That
This is
economic segregation
matternews.org,
map,
right?
matternews.org,
Okay.
and then we do also create content specifically for social media. So Matter News _ on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you know, all that good stuff. You can find our social content, which we'll post about the things that we're publishing to our website, but we'll also post graphics and different like little facts and things and stories that we come across that relate to our coverage or the news industry and things like that.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff on our social platforms you won't find on the website, because they are just little bits of information that help us to inform how we think about development and how we're processing the things that we're working on, and we want to share that with everyone, right? Like we want to be as transparent about our reporting process and the things that we're learning, and it's a learning experience with us, right? Like not many of us that started reporting on this knew that much about development, but then like for example this last Friday we had our event Destination Dystopia, and we screened one of our mini docs there, and it was kind of a first glimpse into one of these mini docs that we'll be publishing here probably in the next few weeks, and it was so amazing to watch like a lot of the core Matter team members in there talking about these development issues and having like really good, like fairly expert knowledge of these things. And we didn't have that when we started, you know, like we didn't know what we were talking about at all. We went out and asked people, what the hell am I talking about? You know, like how do we do this? What does this look like? And through the process of doing that, we've accumulated a lot of knowledge like collectively. And so we really want to be as transparent as we can so that the people that are following us are learning about all these things with us as we grow.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Do y'all have any shout outs to give to anybody? It's been maybe helping you along the way.
Oh man. Well, I would say a lot of the there's so many. I would say a lot of the like OG Gray Matter people and the people that have been there since the very beginning. Like Kevin Truitt, for example, is our board chair, and he's been with Cassie. Like they started working on this when it was when Cassie went and like bought a camera and like went and started knocking on people's doors and were like, tell me what's going on. So I would definitely say him, Riss as well. Cassie's parents have really been really helpful to us in providing a lot of like support and infrastructure and stuff as well. I'm trying to think about
I'd say just like Jaelynn, because I have a day job, so in like Cloud City and some things that I do, so she's been an amazing co-founder, because it's just been great to have, like, I tell people that if you do want to start up a nonprofit, a for-profit, or any kind of like entity, get a co-founder, because your life will be so much better, or at least so much less miserable.
Yeah.
And
it would not be possible.
But at the end of the day, like I'm still in my day job. I would love to leave it, but I haven't done that yet. So I have my day job in Cloud City and stuff, and Jaelynn's really taken on the burden of like doing Matter day in and day out, like using her personal resources to a large extent to like help us fund this thing. So just really appreciate you. It's been super hard on us, and there's, you know, points at which we feel like we're gonna burn out, and we just wish that we weren't trying to do something this ambitious.
Yeah.
But there is a spirit of change, and we like to use the term evolution, I think, very much alive in Columbus right now, and it's really fueling a lot of what we do, and knowing that there is a spirit and a hunger for, you know, more legit news and other types of institutions and organizations.
And shout out to you two for making the time to come out today.
Hell yeah. Shout out to you
Thank
for
you
helping
guys.
us, give a platform to important issues, important work being done in the city and stuff like that.
And, like, well done on the research and the questions for this. Like, as a journalist, as an interviewer, I'm incredibly impressed. So, well done.
Glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
Of course. Absolutely.
If you aren't on that mailing list, you don't know what the next 2 episodes are going to be. But if you join that mailing list, you will be in the know. You will be a real pedestrian, as we might say. We are on the Gab Street, after all. We will see you next Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. sharp, as usual. Coming at you every week with the coolest people in Columbus. Thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you for coming on, and we will catch you next week.
Peace.